All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Jaclyn and I are really excited to spend the next hour with you talking about UTAs. Just to sort of give you a little bit of background on this workshop. Last year, the assistant deans ran a workshop series, and I did a workshop in February on UTAs and how to establish a UTA program and sort of thinking about best practices. And one of the things that came up during that session was UTAs and grading, which at the time was expressly prohibited by the Dietrich School policy. And despite that, a lot of us had really good ideas for how we could imagine using UTAs to help us with grading, but we were told we weren't allowed to. And so now, this year, the Dietrich School has put forth some new guidelines for establishing UTA programs and also what UTAs can be doing within those programs. And one of the big changes that I'm sure many of us have seen is that UTAs are now allowed to grade. But that does come with some restrictions, right? We want to make sure that they're doing so in a way that maintains equity, and limits any potential conflicts of interest. And so, with these new guidelines, Jaclyn and I thought it would be nice to create another workshop or a series of workshops that provide space for faculty across the divisions to talk about the guidelines and to discuss how we're using UTAs, share practices, and sort of, surface any concerns or questions that we have about the new guidelines. And then also help us as assistant deans figure out sort of where support systems need to be and what we could be doing to better support faculty that are using UTAs in their classes. So that's a little bit of background on the session, uh, and sort of where we're headed. In terms of the overview of what we're going to do for the next hour, I am going to spend a couple more minutes talking about our session goals and sort of how we envision the next hour playing out. Jaclyn's going to go through the guidelines briefly and just sort of summarize what big changes there are from last year and previous years. And then really what we want to do is spend the rest of the workshop giving you all a chance to talk. So we want to, in the spirit of active learning, limit the amount that Jaclyn and I are talking and give you all a chance to really discuss what you're doing and share ideas and surface any questions or concerns. So we'll do some breakout room discussions, and ask you all to participate a little bit and then come together as a big group and see sort of our major key takeaways. So our overall goals for the session will be to discuss the UTA guidelines, right, and what has changed, and really to provide this space for collaboration across the disciplines. So just from Jaclyn and I talking about this, we have me from biology, Jaclyn from German, and we teach in pretty different disciplines, but I was actually quite struck by how similar our approaches to our UTA programs are, and also some of the same questions and concerns that have come up for both of us in our classes. And so we thought it would be really nice to get folks talking about the new guidelines and their own experiences using UTAs to help share ideas and create that sort of collaboration that we don't often get to do, particularly across the divisions. And then also, as we're doing that, we're hoping that questions and concerns will come up that we can then help to address, and also think about what additional support or resources may be needed moving forward. I also want to mention that we will be doing a second workshop in a couple of weeks. And so the way that we sort of conceptualized this was the first workshop today is really focused on the new guidelines, thinking about UTAs and grading, and sort of establishing a UTA program, thinking about those of us that are currently doing it and if we're going to make any changes for the spring, right? Starting to make those plans. Anyone that doesn't use UTAs, if you're thinking about using them for the spring, getting again those ideas for establishing that program. And then in our next session in 2 weeks, we want to focus in more on strategies for recruitment and training of your UTAs. That'll fall right before students start registering for spring classes. And so that'll be right when you might be thinking about starting to recruit for your spring classes. And so we were hoping to give some resources for that. And then also thinking about the training that you might do in the spring. And so that's how we're dividing the two sessions. They are designed to be different and have different conversations. But today is really focused on the new guidelines and also thinking about UTAs and grading. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Jaclyn, who's going to walk through briefly the main changes for the UTA guidelines.
That is right. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. This slide has a lot on it, but we want to just start by reviewing the UTA guidelines, specifically, again, these changes and updates. And on the actual UTA guidelines on the website, there is a list that's similar to these kind of common rules. This is an expanded list that Erica provided that I thought was really good. So I was like, we should just keep this in here because it does hit on a couple of things that maybe weren't as specific as the list online. So kind of assisting with classroom management, I thought was really typical, attending planning meetings, and then also we're thinking about helping students to professionalize, helping to train them as well, in the best ways possible. Hosting small study sessions or holding office hours. Oh, thank you, John. Thanks for providing that. Um, and yes, and facilitating small group discussions, giving feedback, like mentoring is on the list as well. Creating supplemental materials, those sorts of things are kind of suggested ways, some common roles and responsibilities for our UTAs. The second point here is rather interesting because this is verbatim from the website. And it's what they should not be doing. And so one thing here was conducting regular class meetings, lectures, or seminars. And I can say that in the German department, we do within our training of TAs, help them plan to guide the class through, for example, a vocabulary activity where they're like, or a game. And so they are leading the group at some point, but it's very guided. So I read this as a note that is to indicate that the TA should not be unsupervised and they should not serve as like a substitute for your class as well. Like I think that's kind of what they're getting at here. And if they do want to get that experience, that leadership experience, I imagine we want to have them in the class, in front of the class at some points, but we can talk about that when we talk about we talk in our breakout rooms as well a bit. Another thing was they should not be doing like discretionary grading. So grading papers or major exams, anything where our judgment is involved and expertise is involved in making decisions about their work, about the students' work. As well as it seems like a lot of these are also set up to avoid the exploitation of UTAs, so that they shouldn't be doing work outside of the boundaries of their rank or level of responsibility. So they shouldn't be assigning final grades or, yeah, the proctoring exams, yeah, alone, though, seems to be interesting as well. That's true. They can do, but they can't do it by themselves. So I think just having some supervision there, yeah, seems to be the way to go. I think major exams, yeah. If they aren't alone, I mean, so what I would say, Gretchen, there, is we've had UTAs, for example, proctor exams or help proctor exams in the Indo-European Folktales course. So, so what I have done is, and we've had student workers serve this role as well, which I think there's some overlap. Erica and I talked about that at some point. Um, that we were also in the room, but the group was 200 students. So having the TAs walk around as well as the faculty member can be really important for those larger classes. Yes, and distributing the exams as well, keeping track of students submitting the exams, all of those things are really just hands-on. You need multiple bodies in the room to be able to do it. And Erica does this all the time. So good. Now can we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, just real quick, I think
Yeah.
in the chat there was one comment about what major exam means. Um,
Oh,
I don't see.
yeah. I mean,
So I think that it's oh, it's not necessarily like major, they cannot grade major exams in terms of like a midterm and a final exam, right? Those being major exams. It's more exams that have judgment calls that are required for analyzing an answer and using disciplinary expertise to be able to assess it appropriately.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, having them proctor in pairs, I don't know if that's an answer. I think we need to have a faculty member in the room. Because as Eric and I was talking about this too, like things come up. So having I mean, we have sometimes people from even outside of the university disrupting classes, which has happened across Pitt's campus apparently too, or some sort of emergency. So having a faculty member there is just important, in general. Yeah. Um, was there anything else that we needed to address before? Cool. Yeah, feel free to contribute to the chat. I love it. This portion of the UTA guidelines is the newest and most detailed new portion, I think, that we need to pay attention to here. And again, this is a kind of brief summary of the changes there. But key here is that UTAs are now permitted to grade in cases of non-discretionary grading. I took that to mean, right, they give the example of grading from a key developed by the instructor. Essentially, these cases where there are little to no judgment calls, I would say probably no judgment calls. It's more or less they're grading multiple choice or a matching section or grading with a key, as opposed to discretionary grading, which would involve some judgment or decision making that would need faculty intervention or expertise. Um, so. Oh, that's a good question, Rachel. Huh. That's a good question. I don't know. What do you think about that, Erica? So students can't proctor a makeup exam in UTA office hours. Hmm.
I mean, I think in terms of maintaining equity for all students, I think it's different having a UTA proctor your exam than having a faculty member proctor your exam. So I do think that the guideline says that UTAs should not be proctoring exams. But I think it's something we can definitely talk about as we have a ton of students, and sometimes we have DRS exams that need to be proctored outside of the testing center. We have makeup exams that need to be proctored, and especially in large classes, there's one of us and so many students. So, according to the way that the guidelines are written, I would say UTAs are not supposed to be proctoring exams on their own. But I think that's open for discussion.
Yeah, yeah. I think we should talk about the FERPA concerns there as well. I mean, that kind of comes up here too. And this is also part of our resources discussion as well. Um, so, I mean, this idea though of discretionary versus non-discretionary grading is an important nuance that we can also talk about and think about the kinds of assessments we're giving and what fits in where. But I think the new policies also emphasize pretty heavily that the UTA's grading must be monitored by the course instructor and that the instructor should develop a clear line of communication with the class who is being graded. That essentially the UTAs have a kind of limited authority, a limited role in grading. And if there's any disputes, and this should also be made very clear in the syllabus, if there's any disputes, students can have their work regraded by the faculty member, and that they should not be punished for that in any way. So that we should remain open. Like if we're having UTAs grading, we should remain open to a process like this and state that clearly in their syllabus. So I think that makes sense. It's just kind of covering your bases as well. When you have anyone involved in your grading, you also want to make sure there's some clear communication there. And those of us who work with recitation leaders and things know it's also important in those cases as well, lab instructors. Yeah, so it makes sense. Yes, and that it should be anonymized, so that the identifiable student information is removed, which is a challenge too. I mean, it's additional work for the faculty member to have that grading happen through the UTA. Yeah, seeing scores, the database. Agreed. Agreed, Eugenia. I think that's something we should talk about. I think this should be a point of conversation because Eric and I talked about too. I mean, in our department, in our like pod, which is made up of like most of the languages here in the cathedral, we do have frequently student workers, and the student workers would be copying exams or potentially handling confidential information, things that like scholarship information, even sometimes. And so we would have them, um, not really scholarship information, I take that back, but other things that felt like, okay, this is something that could be sensitive. We typically have them sign an NDA, and this could also be a route that we might consider with our UTAs as well. So that and establishing early on, are there any conflicts of interest for that student in that class? Do they know anyone else in that class? Um, that's also key. Yeah. Questions? Erica, feel free to jump in if I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think that I mean, we're bringing up a lot of points here right now that show us all the gray areas, right? And so I
Yeah.
acknowledge just by looking at the guidelines that there are a lot of
Yep.
gray areas, which is why we wanted to have this conversation in the first place. I think one thing to keep in mind is, our UTAs and our students are peers. They may have other classes together where they're sitting next to each other. They may have roommates that are friends, right? They may see each other out at a party. So we have to
Yeah.
keep in mind that there isn't a power structure that makes sense for our UTAs to be able to have information about our students' grades, right? And from our students' perspective, many of them probably don't want their UTAs who they see in other classes or they might run into outside of class knowing how they're performing in the class. So seeing their score on an exam that they're passing back could be problematic for a student in your class who doesn't want that TA to know their score. And so I think we just have to be really careful with that line of what are our UTAs doing that are helpful for us, helpful for our students? How are we talking to both our UTAs and our students to make sure that they understand that conflict and are avoiding that conflict? And how do we do it in a way that's careful to protect our students from anything that would make them uncomfortable, right? So these are all great discussion points, and I appreciate everyone
Yeah.
for bringing them up.
Briefly, just about the NDA, I believe our administrators handle all of that, so it does go through HR. So I think that it does go through legal. It's yeah, very much on the up and up. And it's been something that's been in place for like it was like pre-pandemic that they had them signing NDAs too. Um, I don't know if there's ones that have been used by faculty with UTAs, but I think that it's something we could discuss as a way of right having some security there too. But agreed, Erica, it doesn't get around this situation where students know each other and they maybe don't want them to know what their grades are in the class, you know? So it's going to be have to be something that yeah we kind of handle too on a case by case basis. And with that in mind, there are some reminders that we should be aware of here too. And this is also on the website that faculty members who are working with UTAs must. And while we were reading this through, we also felt like this is a lot to know, but it is also things that are very typical when you're working with the UTA. So having some knowledge of the student before they work with you beyond their class performance, working with the students ahead of time to identify peer conflicts, meeting with students ahead of time to identify schedule conflicts. That makes sense. I mean, that's something that needs to be clarified probably before they even enroll in credit for a UTA position. Um, Articulating the scale of credit or stipend, we talked about this too, that in some cases there might be instances where some departments are using pass-fail grades for this, others are using actual grades. So how are these credits being kind of accounted for? And um, and then of course also establishing these lines of communication, making sure that they are in communication with you and you with them about policies, about upcoming responsibilities, et cetera. And ensuring that the UTAs receive proper training, which is also something that we want to try to facilitate or help with a little bit more, as Erica mentioned earlier. And this was one too that struck me, never require UTAs to prepare course material. And we had a conversation about this too. I was like, but um, we can't have them develop an activity and work with them on it. But Erica was like, oh no, but they can develop supplemental materials. And that makes so much more sense. So review sheets and things like that. And that they shouldn't be required to do it. But if it's something that they want to do or want to contribute, could be. So I don't know. The way I read that is kind of different each time I read it. Kind of nuanced as well. And then that you should review regularly with the students, any work they'll be using in a study group. And I think that goes along with preparing course material. If a student prepares something, that we should review it in advance before giving it to the class. And then meeting with the student or students regularly throughout the term, monitoring their performance, et cetera. And this then can take place in various ways. In German, we have them write portfolios at the end of doing their teaching internships, which is, I think, a little bit different than what other folks are doing too. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance and ways we can talk about these things. So good. And then from here, I'll hand it over to Erica again to get us set up with the breakout rooms.
Yeah, just to address a couple things in the chat about the classroom activities. This was something Jaclyn and I talked about a lot because I think the wording of the um, guidelines is meant to suggest that your UTA should not be creating your class materials for you. Like they're not writing your lectures, they're not making your PowerPoint slides, they're not writing your assignments, your homework questions, right? But they can certainly be creating supplemental work, right? So creating a review game, materials for office hours, those sorts of things. Again, if they are interested in creating those materials, is absolutely okay and encouraged, right? I think that those materials help our students a lot. Okay,
Well,
moving.
another example of that too is that part of what we have them do in German is they lead the class through an activity, and sometimes they choose to create that activity, and then other times they choose to use an activity from the book. So it is then kind of up to us how we're, facilitating this as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Erica.
Oh, no, good. So it sounds like just from going through the guidelines, we've brought up a whole bunch of discussion points already. So we're going to be opening some breakout rooms. It's a random assignment, so we are intentionally trying to mix folks up from across the disciplines. And we've got some discussion prompts to get you started, but I also think that you can take whatever discussions we've already started in the large group and work from there as well. But again, we just want to give you all a chance to have some conversations with each other about these topics and the new guidelines in particular. So the questions to get us started include sort of a warm-up question, right? What are the benefits of UTAs? I think that the guidelines made it clear that, you know, building a UTA program requires a lot of work, right? There's a lot of things we need to be thinking about. And so I think it's important to start from the point of view of what's the benefit of having UTAs in the first place, and is all of this even worth it, right? So are we establishing that having a UTA program is something that you should be doing? Um, in terms of the new guidelines, right, what have you been doing that's new or different because of these guidelines, right? Are they impacting your practice in any way? And then UTAs and grading, I think, is an area where we have a lot of questions about what they can be doing. And so, what are those questions? What are those concerns? What issues have you encountered or do you anticipate or things that you think that we should be thinking about as we continue to develop these guidelines? We do have a link to some Google slides that I will put in the chat here. Um, let's see here. Guess I can stop sharing. Okay, so I will go ahead and put this in the chat so that we have a link. We did just hope that everybody could, in your breakout rooms, kind of keep track of some of the main points of discussion so that we have a record of it after. And then the Google Slides also have slides for you with all of the discussion prompts. But again, feel free to sort of work through your own discussion based on what we've already talked about. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms. Everyone should have been invited to a breakout room, and everyone should have access to the Google document, but let me know if anyone does not. All right, we are going to go ahead and open up the floor for key takeaways, comments, questions,
You're
just
muted.
large group debrief. John, would you like to go first? I see your
Yeah,
hand.
I just had a quick question, Erica, and I don't know if you, Jaclyn, or Russ can maybe answer this.
Mhm.
What was the motivation for the change? As I said in the rules, and as I said in my group, the one thing that I imagined would likely be sacrosanct was grading. Just because it seems to questions that Lorraine and Gretchen and others raised that really touch on pretty serious issues, whether legal or otherwise. Do you know why they seem to liberalize that?
The short answer is no. This came up last year, and there was, a lot of conversation from faculty saying it would really help if we could have UTA's grading. I think particularly in large classes in the STEM fields where there is a lot of grading that is not subjective, right? We could see and using GradeScope, it's so easy to anonymize, right? So I think that the push from faculty kind of then ended up on the radar of the dean's office. But I can tell you that I was just as surprised by the new guidelines as you, that I was not anticipating them coming out. So I do think it was a push from faculty, particularly in fields that, could envision ways to do it without students seeing grades of individual students. Jaclyn, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, this kind of happened, this conversation's happened before my time in the dean's office. So I'm happy to know that. But I'm also, yeah, I was also surprised with this release. I mean, on some level, and Melinda brought this up too, and I think so did Eugene in our conversations as well, that um, who is supervising this? Like, who is, saying that faculty are following these guidelines and um, who's keeping an eye on this? So hopefully they are following the guidelines and not pushing it too far. But there are some gray areas there with certain things. I mean, so it's very tricky. Yeah.
I'm seeing a comment in the chat about GradeScope. So GradeScope is great for UTA's grading, and I'm doing it for the first time this semester because you scan all of the hard copies of the exams into the program, and then the program has an anonymized feature, which then converts your roster into new numbers, right? Random numbers for each student. So your TAs can go in and grade, and all they're seeing is the exams and the random numbers attached to them, which are connected to your Canvas roster. So you know who's who, but they can't see that. And then the other great feature is that you can automatically do regrade. Um, Requests through GradeScope. So the students can put in a request for a regrade, and then it automatically gets emailed to you as the instructor. So you can handle all the regrades, and the students, then the TAs aren't doing any regrades. And so it opens that line of communication with your students of, yes, the TAs are doing some of the GradeScope grading, but I will address any regrade requests, and I'm happy to do so. Does the university have a subscription? Yes, it does. So everyone can access it. I will say there's a little bit of a learning curve to it, but once you get it, it's a really wonderful software program. I really, really love using it. I think chemistry uses it too. Eugene, do you use Gradescope?
Yep, we use
Yeah.
it extensively.
Yeah,
We use it in economics too.
sure. Yeah, I think that it helps in a lot of fields. You can do a lot with it. And yes, you can upload paper exams. So you scan the exams in a copier and then upload the file, and it matches the exam to the students. And then you can grade question by question. And it has AI features that help to group answer choices as well. So it can also speed up your grading pretty extensively. And
Very
yes,
cool.
automatically populates exam grades into Canvas. Yeah, it connects with your Canvas roster. So you just hit post grades and they automatically go into your grade book, and you don't have to think about it.
That is lovely. Huh.
Yeah. Yes.
Very
I do think
cool.
that the CTL has some grade scope experts. So if you're looking for a tutorial, there are people at CTL that can do that for you. All right. I see some really productive conversations based on the Google Slides. Does anybody have anything sort of outstanding that you want to cover in our last few minutes here? Things you're still concerned about? Something someone else brought up in your breakout room that you're still thinking about? Melinda, go ahead.
I think one thing that came up in our breakout room that's worth just talking about here is the fact that supervising UTAs is actually a lot of work. And so even allowing them to grade does not substantially reduce the amount of work that we do as instructors, particularly for large enrollment courses. And so I just think it would be useful to kind of reframe taking on UTAs as actually the instructor doing a service for the university rather than this is a reduction in our work, right? Because that's really what it looks like. And so, my concern was around if we frame it instead that, oh, now UTAs can grade, that's going to reduce faculty's work. It takes down a barrier to increasing enrollment caps, right? And so now we can cram 20 more students, 30 more students into a class. It's fine. They have UTAs that can grade. And that is something that I don't want to see happen because it's just not true. Right. And so that's my concern with this. And I think there are people who do a really good job with UTAs, and I've taken on UTAs despite the fact that it's more work. I do see the benefits of it. But it concerns me that there's no level of supervision as to like how UTAs are being utilized in classes. And that by opening this up to allow them to grade, it sort of is going to open up the possibility of more students in our classes.
No, I just want to echo some of that too. I think, and what Gretchen wrote in the chat too. I think for us, it is also a mentoring project, but it is a project that should be counted in maybe workload, service load policies. So, I mean, that's something to bring up with your um, uh, department chairs in these service load discussions, I think as well, because it is part of a professionalization process. I mean, from what I've heard from most folks, like, yes, UTAs are great and yes, they can be helpful, but also we're teaching them and training them to, I mean, Seth brought this up too, to teach in our classes, right? To know that material well enough to explain it to others. It's great for them. It's also, I mean, in the German department, we use it for preparing students for applications for Fulbright, for example. So it's, it is part of that professionalization process that, they're getting out of it too. Sorry, Sybil.
Sorry, I fully agree with Melinda too. But my question has more to do about, was there any inquiry done for the enrolled, like how are the enrolled students expected to respond to this? I mean, do we have any idea? Um,
I mean, I don't know. I don't know, Erica, have you heard anything about student reactions? I mean, I think the policy seems to be written in a way to like mitigate those reactions, to communicate with the classes from the beginning within your syllabus, saying like there will be UTA's grading. This is how they will do it if you need things to be regraded. And so I guess they're just waiting to see if problems pop up. I don't know if there have been problems. That would be a question for Jeff too. We should ask Jeff about that. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that students were consulted in developing the guidelines to see what their impression of them are. I can tell you just from doing this in my class this semester, I have communicated with students that the UTAs will be doing this type of grading. We've had two assessments so far, and I've had UTAs grade two assessments and haven't had any issues, but that's of course one class with 325 students, right? So that's the only sample I have. But yes, I imagine that it could lead to problems. And so I think the goal right now is to use the guidelines to try to avoid those problems. Um, and then I will say, in terms of the regrading, I think in my experience, the UTAs, after a little lecture from me about how important it is that they are doing a good job on this, were more careful than I ever am. So after my first exam, I posted the grades thinking all of these regrade requests are going to come in from mistakes that my UTAs made. And I ended up with 5 regrade requests, and they were all mistakes that I made. So I think that the UTAs are almost more careful because they understand the implications of an error and care about those errors almost more than I do because I can go in and fix it really easily. But that's an aside. But then just real quick, I wanted to address Melinda, your comments I think are unbelievably valid, and it's something that I talk about a lot because when I think about UTA programs, definitely I think about the benefits for the UTAs and the students way over any benefits for me. And the grading rules, right, that we have now still require a faculty member being present to supervise. So even though the TAs are doing the clicking and helping me get through the grading, I'm still there. I'm still present. It's still time out of my day. And they're asking questions as they're going, right? So adding more students, right, with the argument that you have UTAs to now grade would definitely not support the role of the UTAs in the classroom right now. But I think it's important to note that that's how the guidelines are reading. So thank you for that. I think that's important that we talk about that. Okay, we are running out of time. I'm trying to think what other questions we have. Oh, so comments in the chat about enjoying working with UTAs. I appreciate that comment as well because I also will say that that is some of the most enjoyable work that I do because in large classes you don't get to know students. So this is a way to actually get students. So again, as a benefit, that enjoyment is good, but yes, they are often a lot of work. Okay. Do we want to do any last thoughts? Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. We are going to pick this up again in 2 weeks. We would love if you want to join us again. I'm going to take all of the questions that you guys brought up and the notes from the workshop, and maybe we can start our next session addressing some of the things that went unanswered or that Jaclyn and I couldn't answer properly, and see if we can give you all better answers, and then go from there on recruitment and training practices.
Thanks so much, everyone. This was great. Amazing
Thank
discussions.
you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.